Welcome to the DFS Build NBA edition for today's one-game Showdown Slate. We haven't done a Showdown Slate in a while, so I was debating whether or not to even do a video for today, but I'm going to play the slate, and I think there is some edge to be gained, so I figure I'll just share my thoughts and strategy and, do with it what you may. If this video likes or helps you at all, give it a like. And also consider subscribing to our channel, the DFS Build. This video is sponsored by DFS Hero, cool lineup optimizer you can see on screen here, which I'll be using for projections, optimal lineup percentages, and ownership. Although ownership currently is not up there just because it's really early in the day, super early, 7 a.m. Central. So coming to you very early, but that's what you got to do. You got to hit the ground running each day, gain that edge. But yeah, check them out. 15% off discount in our with our link in the video description below. All right, let's get right to it. Not going to waste too much time today. Hopefully we'll keep it under 10 minutes because it is just one game. But this game obviously does have a decent 210 total. We got the Knicks and the Pacers at Madison Square Garden. Indiana does not defend well, and they do tend to push the pace. Game one went to the Knicks, 121-117. So that's kind of what we can anticipate here. Another shootout, assuming it stays close. The Pacers did keep it relatively close in the first game. So I think there's hopes for that to happen again. But either way, it is what it is. This is the game we have on the slate. We know it can be up tempo. We know there can be a lot of points. So did I say 210, 220 total? My bad. But the first thing I like to do for a showdown slate is kind of formulate my player pool for captains. Now, to be fair, you technically can play whoever you want in captain. If you want to go all the way down for like an absolute punt and, who's like a viable punt for this showdown slate? Ben Shepherd, okay? He is getting minutes. He had 18 minutes in game one, and he played about 15 to 20 minutes, depending on the game, in the first round series against the Bucks. A little surprising that he's got this role off the bench. But here he is at 3.6K for captain. And if you go to utility, he is all the way down to 2.4K. So Ben Shepherd is 100% going to be in my player pool for multiple lineups in the utility spot. But he's not really, for me, a captain guy. The captain guy does not always have to be the top performer of the night, but they have to be comparable. They have to be relatively close. Or you have to like hit the nuts on your utility slot, and the top end studs, they probably can't go absolutely nuclear. So like if you're on a slate with Jokic and you punt with like Reggie Jackson in the captain slot, and Reggie Jackson has a big game and has like 50 fantasy points, that's great. But Reggie Jackson is probably pretty chalky, which means a lot of people have him. And then if Jokic goes and gets 90, a lot of people have him in the captain. That's probably going to be where you lose your edge. So even if Reggie Jackson's low owned in the captain, that's probably going to work against you. So keep that in mind. So for me, especially for NBA, I'm just going to look at the guys who probably have the best shot at having one of the best games, if not the best game of the night. So obviously, right off the bat, let's just start with the Pacers. As far as projection goes, Tyrese Haliburton, Pascal Siakam, and Miles Turner. Those are the three main guys that you want to look at when looking at the captain. So I'm just going to move to utility so we just get the regular projection first. So those are probably the only three Pacers I really want in the captain spot, just because I think they offer the best combination of floor and ceiling. And if you look at the DFS Hero projections, that is 100% true. They all average or offer a floor at 26 or higher, and nobody else on the Pacers comes at even a 15 floor. So can you throw in Aaron Nesmith or Andrew Nembhard and hope that they just drop like 40 real points? Yeah, you can do that. But is that probably what's going to happen? I doubt it. I think those guys are definitely viable for utility, but they're not really in my player pool for captain slots. Same with TJ McConnell and Obi Toppin. Absolutely really good utility plays. They are going to get about 15 to 20 minutes off the bench. Let's actually check Obi's minutes from game one, 19. So yeah, probably about 15 to 20. TJ McConnell, 22. So, 20 plus about. That's about what we can expect. And then I also mentioned Ben Shepherd too. So he is definitely a viable value. But as far as captains go, I'm really just looking at Haliburton, Siakam, and Turner from the Indiana side. And then these other guys are good plays, but I would be looking really at only utility. And then honestly, we can't do a whole lot yet based off because we don't have the ownership yet. But I'm imagining obviously that Haliburton and Siakam and Turner are all going to carry ownership anyways. But I don't really expect those three to be very chalky in the captain slot. If you look at the captain pricing at DraftKings, Haliburton and Siakam are two of the most expensive plays, and they are actually second and third for price behind Brunson. So, I mean, people are just going to gravitate towards these stud guys for good reason because they're studs, and because also salary. People who aren't really experienced are just going to assume that they're the better plays because they're averaging the most points and because they're the most expensive. They're not wrong, but that just might pick up their ownership a little bit. So what we could do is try to pick the one that is probably going to be less owned. At this point, judging by the slate, the last time Indiana was on it, I would surprisingly think it's Haliburton. He's actually a little bit more expensive than Siakam. So of that trio, Haliburton is the most appealing to me. He's got the best projection. He has the best ceiling. He averages the most fantasy points per minute. And I actually would not be surprised at all if he has lower ownership than Siakam and, of course, lower ownership than Jalen Brunson. So for captain, I'm looking at those three guys. As far as the other slots for Indiana, Siakam and Turner and Haliburton are all obviously very viable for utility. I love Aaron Nesmith and Andrew Nembhard down here. If you look at utility, they're in the mid-range, kind of lower tier a little bit. Nembhard, Nesmith. Nesmith is my preferred play at 5K, and he's only 400 more than TJ McConnell. He's just guaranteed more minutes. So McConnell's totally fine if it comes down to ownership and Aaron Nesmith is coming at 40% and McConnell is somehow like 25. We can maybe go to McConnell and just hope that he has a huge game off the bench. So that McConnell and Obi, 4.6 and 4.4K, totally in play. Ben Shepherd is going to be interesting. If Ben Shepherd comes in unowned, he's going to be a really easy guy to slide in there at 2.4K into the utility spot and free up a lot of money. If he's chalky, though, I will gladly get away from Ben Shepherd and just go with a more balanced build and hope he just has like a really big-time floor game. And that's definitely what he can do. I mean, he doesn't really do a lot when he's out there. He hasn't had over 15 fantasy points in any game in the playoffs yet. Obviously, he could get hot shooting and make me look stupid, but he just has exhibited no ceiling, even though he's been out there for like almost 20 minutes some games. And he's had 2 games with just 10 fantasy points. So he could have a game much worse than that. And his median and ceiling just aren't really that appealing. Obviously, the price is great. So if he's not mega chalk, and maybe even if he is, you can use Ben Shepherd and feel reasonably good about it. But I will probably play the ownership when it comes to Ben Shepherd. On the other side of this game, Jalen Brunson is going to be the leading chalk captain, even with his price coming in at a hefty 18K. I have no qualms with that. I think you can get different on a Showdown Slate by eating the Brunson captain chalk if you want to do that. He does have the best projection. He's got the best ceiling. He has the best per minute average. He's in the optimal lineup most of the time. So everything looks good for Brunson. He smashed yet again in game 1, 43 real points, 60 fantasy points. He's had 40 plus real points in 4 consecutive games, 39 plus real points in 5 consecutive games. Dude is on a heater. So Brunson looks awesome at captain. Pretty damn necessary at utility if you don't captain him. So I would imagine Brunson is like just uber chalk across the board. You have to play Brunson, I would imagine. Fading him seems a bit silly. If you fade him, if you want to fade him, or if you want to be grossly underweight, here's why you would do it. Fading captain or being underweight on captain is purely an ownership leverage and hoping that he doesn't have like a crazy game, or hoping that the other guy you go with is low owned and can offer a comparable outing that would either match or just barely exceed Brunson, which would give you an edge. But if you're fading completely or being really underweight across the board, then you're banking on an injury or a blowout or Brunson just completely face planting. Based off of how he's played, I don't think he's going to face plant. So if you're betting on a blowout or injury, I think you're doing it wrong. It's obviously a showdown slate. It's just the one game. You got to play it for what it is. And if you can play blowout without fading the best player in the game, like you can play Brunson at captain or in utility and just like play more of these play a couple more of these value guys and really stack the top of the lineup if that's what you really want to do. I don't think that's the best way to approach this slate, though. So I'm eating the Brunson chalk in general, but I do, if I'm doing many lineups, I do want to get different at captain. So obviously one way to do that is just not use Brunson, and basically anybody else you use is going to give you a little bit of an ownership edge, and you just need to hope that they don't suck. And also probably that Brunson doesn't get like 50 real points and you completely nuke the slate. So the three Pacers guys are viable for doing that. I think Haliburton's my favorite, but all three are very, very much in play. Siakam has displayed the best ceiling of the three, so there's that. But like I said, I imagine that will give him a lot of ownership, probably the most ownership among Pacers. As far as the Knicks side goes, Josh Hart just got done with like a 60 fantasy point outing. Yeah, 59.75. The guy is a triple-double threat. If he's not pushing for a triple-double, you know he can get a double-double. He plays basically the entire game. Here's his minutes the last 4 games: 48, 46, 53, 46. He has not dipped below 40 minutes in any playoff game so far this year. So, I mean, talk about a floor. I mean, you know you're going to get a very, very stable player with Josh Hart. And on a showdown slate, I feel like Hart is an absolute lock. Depending on ownership, Hart is also a very interesting captain play for me. He has had 36 plus fantasy points in every playoff game so far, and and he's only had under 40 fantasy points in 2 games. So he just does so much when he's out there, and just like crazy, crazy minutes. So he feels like it's, as far as like, okay, Brunson is like the safest play with like a crazy ceiling on this slate, but Hart is like right behind him as far as safety and floor goes. Really good permanent guy in the lineup, or optimal lineup 40% of the time. The price could give us an issue a little bit because he's 9.6 in utility, 14.4 in captain. But obviously, if you dip down to him in captain, you're saving $4,000 in the captain slot, and that, then you get Brunson in. I think it's a little bit easier to do it that way. But anyways, my point is Brunson had 60 fantasy points last game. Hart had 59. That is a situation where you're getting a comparable score. You're saving money in the captain slot. You're getting better in utility, and you're getting a lower owned player. I don't know how like crazy low owned Josh Hart is going to be on this slate, but he is absolutely viable for the captain slot, and for me, he's a lock in the utility slot. As far as the other Knicks go, I'm not really looking at OG Anunoby or Isaiah Hartenstein for the captain, but I think you could do that if you want to. OG needs just like the most massive stealing game ever for him to hit in that environment. Like a few games ago against the Sixers, he had 16 points and 14 rebounds in 47 minutes, 40 fantasy points. So like that's kind of his ceiling. He's been actually really good just because he's out there the whole game basically. In 3 of his last 4 games, he's had 34 plus fantasy points. So he's a rock solid play in the utility. I don't think he has the ceiling to really get us there in the captain though. Hartenstein is kind of the same. In game 1, he had 26 fantasy points. He did play 36 minutes. The minutes are very, very encouraging. Indiana does not defend well down low at all. So Hartenstein could feast easily. I think he's an okay GPP captain play. But for the most part, I would be using him at the utility as well. The only other guy for the Knicks that I actually am pretty interested in for captain would be DiVincenzo. Dante DiVincenzo, it's all about hot shooting. In the last game against the Sixers, he had 23 real points, 7 assists. In 48 minutes, he had 50 fantasy points. So when you're looking at Brunson, Hart, DiVincenzo, he's easily going to be the lowest owned captain. And if you look at the Pacers, he's probably going to be like 7th here in ranking, or 6th in ranking among these top 6 plays. So DiVincenzo is a very interesting captain. He's exhibited that stealing to get there. He was solid in game 1 of this series, 25 real points, 35 fantasy points, 44 minutes. So you want guys, obviously, in DFS that are going to play a lot, and you want guys that have that ceiling. So DiVincenzo is a risk in the captain slot, but because of expected ownership and the ceiling he's displayed, I actually like him there quite a bit. And I'm totally fine with, obviously, just playing him in utility if I end up going with Chalk Brunson or a different pivot. As far as value goes, Precious Achiuwa, let's see. I think actually, Mitchell Robinson is out. So that does cement Hartenstein a little bit more than usual. But actually what it does for me is makes Precious Achiuwa a pretty interesting GPP flyer. Only 4 minutes in game 1 of this series, but he did get burned in the Philly game, and there's always the possibility that Hartenstein gets in foul trouble, or just the general absence of Mitchell Robinson could open up a few extra minutes. Mitchell Robinson played 12 minutes in game 1. So maybe that lets Precious get out there for like 10 to 12 minutes. In a showdown slate, if you're sliding in value, I think that might be enough to get me interested, especially if we go and look and Ben Shepherd is like massive chalk. Precious Achiuwa is $200 less. I would just pivot there in a few lineups, and hopefully that is the difference. Another guy you can do is Miles McBride, pay $800 more over Precious, or $600 more over Ben Shepherd, and Miles McBride would be plenty viable in a showdown slate. He did only get 11 minutes in game 1, 1.5 fantasy points, 9 minutes in the last game against the Sixers, 3.5 fantasy points. So he's not really getting it done on a per minute basis, and the role really isn't there right now. And that has a lot to do with Dante DiVincenzo just shooting the lights out these days, and OG just being out there every minute because of his defense. That being said, obviously Bojan Bogdanovic is out for the year, and Mitchell Robinson's not there. So there are a few extra minutes here to go around. So I think at 3K in the utility slot, Miles McBride is totally fine as a punt. For the most part, in my lineups, I would be kind of sifting through those 3 values, and just playing the ownership game, because I don't think any of those guys, McBride, Precious, or Shepherd, are so good that we can't fade them, so just kind of play the ownership and trust your gut there. But yeah, so that really does it. Actually went a little bit long on a showdown slate, a little surprising, but hopefully that insight helps you a little bit. A quick recap. If I'm doing a lot of lineups, I'm probably going to have Jalen Brunson as my captain most of the time, and I am going to trust the lineup projection tool here at DFS Hero. If you just run their system without doing any tweaks, let's just see what they punch out. And I bet you Brunson's in the captain, and there he is in the captain slot right there. And that's without doing any tweaks or adding any of my personal likes or dislikes, or playing with ownership, or even going over here to Sims or anything. It just makes sense. He's the most optimal play of the slate. He should be in your lineup whether he's in captain or not. So Brunson being there is totally fine. And for the majority of my lineups, I would do that and then work really hard to get different down here. Isaiah Hartenstein, Josh Hart, 2 plays I really like. I like Aaron Nesmith. I like Turner. I have no problem with this lineup whatsoever. I think one quick way to get different would be Miles McBride. If he ends up being a chalky play here, we could pivot to the other values that I was saying. And then also you can play with pivoting off of Aaron Nesmith, like I was saying, maybe to TJ McConnell. If you have money left over, you can go up to Andrew Nembhard, and so on and so forth. So, and then obviously the quickest way to get different would be moving Brunson down here. That saves you a little cash, and you could go and put one of these guys up here, which is an easy flip from the current optimal, or you could add in DiVincenzo and then replace Hartenstein or Turner, and so on. So once projections are out, we're going to have a little bit clearer image of what we want to do. And then we can, run these systems and update things and make better decisions. It's a showdown slate, so it's kind of like, everything needs to break just right, and you need to try to avoid duplicate lineups. So my advice would be to just like choose your lane. It's either just do one single entry where you get different in captain and then like eat a lot of the rest of the chalk and just, hope that captain smashes, or you just play a little bit of the ownership game and you run out a lot of lineups with Brunson heavy in captain and get different in the other spots. All right, so hopefully that helps you out. If it does, please give this video a like and also consider subscribing to the channel. Thanks for watching.